Friends, reptiles. People who love the medieval period, but in a, like, normal way. There is nothing in my life that I care about more than being cozy. Okay, there's like 1,200 things I care about more than that, but run with it, it's for the bit. Long-time viewers of the channel may be familiar with this. Oh, it's got a hole in it. I should fix that. Anyway, this is a pretty good replica-ish of find D10580, I think. Pattern courtesy of this book. If you're one of the like 6 people who have never heard of Herjolfsnes, I'm probably pronouncing that wrong. It's a place in Greenland, and in the 1920s they excavated a graveyard in which they found surprisingly intact medieval Norse clothing. These garments were 800 to 900 years old, and not only were they recognizable as clothing, which is really rare for stuff that survived that long, let alone buried in the ground, but they were preserved well enough that almost 100 years later, people could study them and take patterns from them, which they've published in a book, so that you can make your own. The thing is though, just because there is a pattern in a book, it's still not an easy process. I'll get into the pros and cons of this book a little bit later on in the video. Needless to say, making this very much a wearable mock-up version was a challenge. Nevertheless, I wear this all of the time. It's incredibly useful. A loose-fitting something that you can throw on first thing in the morning, and then if you're not leaving the house that day, you're sorted. I've worn it to sleep in, I've worn it when I'm ill, I've worn it where I'm just having a sofa day. Extremely multi-purpose. I definitely wanted more like this. I just wasn't really enthused by the prospect of trying to piece together how this thing was supposed to go based on some minimal instructions in a book. Which is why I was very excited when a new challenger entered the ring. So this is the Summit Dress by Scroop Patterns. This is a PDF pattern that you print at home. It is relatively new, and it offers not only a simplified version of the very famous gown itself, but also a slightly more modern interpretation. It's a little bit shorter, the sleeves are a bit different, it uses slightly more fabric, don't worry about it. So I immediately knew that I wanted to make this gown. However, I had been meaning to remake the original gown, at least in another mock-up version, because there's stuff about the fit on this that I don't love. I've been meaning to do that since like 2021. So obviously I need to make 2 dresses in one video. That's the only option. Oh boy. Okay, strap in. Let's start with the summit dress. Moonbin have once again sent me one of their thermal printers to test out, which will make printing my patterns super easy. Because it's a thermal printer, it uses heat-sensitive paper, so I never need to replace an ink cartridge. At 0.71 kilograms with a built-in battery, the ITP02 is even lighter and more streamlined than previous printers I've tried. It's extremely portable, I could bring this anywhere. This printer connects to your phone or your computer really easily via Bluetooth. A lot of printers need a cable to connect to a Windows machine, so being able to use Bluetooth is really convenient. It also uses the Moonbin app, the same as the label printer I tested previously, so there's no need to download or install anything new, and it comes with a bunch of templates. I started by printing the first sheet of the pattern as a test, and I could get started straight away. The printer is very quiet, with no weird smells and no messy ink transferring to my fabric. I'm using the Moonbin paper, which is BPA-free, FSC certified, non-toxic and eco-friendly. This printer can use various paper types, including A4, US letter, A5 and B5 in both folded and roll formats. Just remember that the paper will change colour if heated, so no ironing these pattern pieces. I found the weight of the paper really easy to work with. It's a nice thickness and it's not too heavy or too delicate. Thank you Moonbin for letting me test out this great little printer, and if you'd like to get your own, check out the description for a link. Honestly, the hardest part of this pattern was figuring out how I was going to squeeze it out of 4 meters of a narrow width cotton muslin, the only fabric I had on hand that was suitable for a mock-up, close to the recommended fabric, and in a non-directional print. I am technically doing view A with the higher neckline, longer length and two-piece gauze, but with the view B lantern sleeves because, well, you'll see them and you'll understand. I ended up refolding the fabric several times in different directions so that I could cut both long front and back pieces on the fold, the wide side front and side back panels without piecing, and everything else wherever I could fit it. The front and back gauze I had to cut as two pieces and the sleeves are not remotely on grain, but I did somehow get all the pieces I needed. The instructions were very thorough and had, for the first time ever in my experience, actual instructions on how to stay stitch a neckline instead of just telling you to do it. There were also detailed instructions on how to prepare the front and back panels to insert the gauze. I am using a contrast thread because this is technically a mock-up and I need to use it up, but I think the colours actually look pretty good. The first actual construction step was to sew the front and back gauze along the centre front or back. If you are less foolish than me about fabric, you can cut them on the fold. The seam allowances of the front opening are pressed back, and then the two pieces are layered to create a lapped seam. There's detailed instructions on how to do this in the pattern. I top stitched the front and back in place with the mixed results. Good thing this is a draft. The side fronts get sewn to the front and the side backs to the back. There's instructions and a pattern piece for pockets, but I'm not a fan of pockets in loose dresses, so I left those out. I didn't have the fabric anyway. Both halves get sewn together at the shoulders and sides. Then the upper and lower sleeves were sewn together, which wasn't too hard to sew, but was an absolute beast to press. And the sleeves were sewn up the inside and then set into the armholes of the dress. The pattern calls for bias binding, but I finished the neck hole and sleeves with a tiny little rolled hem because I felt like it, and then we pretty much have a finished garment. So let's talk about the real thing. So there are a lot of patterns in this book. There's actually like quite a range of garments, accessories. There's hoods, there's stockings, there's something more like a surcoat. There are some garments that are sized for children. There's a lot in this book. Nevertheless, D10580 is the one that 90% of people who are talking about this book or this collection of finds will talk about. It's the famous one. It's the 12 gauge gown, which is interesting. Calling it a 12 gauge gown is stretching things just a tad. I believe this comes from the fact that before this book came out, which was in 2010, the internet knew this gown existed, but we didn't have a lot of information about it. And this led to a lot of people coming up with their own theories based on a couple of photos and some descriptions online, many of which were not technically correct. This isn't really a 12 gauge gown because the two side back panels are actually one panel with like a fake seam in it. It gives the illusion of being a 12 gauge gown, but it's actually only 10. It's the kind of thing you would just never know if you didn't have someone who had access to the actual garment, like doing this for you. So first things first, what is this book and what is it not? This book is a collection of gridded patterns. Many of the patterns are in multiple sizes. Having said that, when I say multiple sizes, I mean like 3. Don't expect the large to be especially large. These were not large people. It has some information about the kind of fabric and the kind of finishes that were used. It has a surprisingly large amount of information about the colours that those fabrics were. It does not have any actual construction instructions. You're gonna have to figure out how to get these pieces to fit together on your own. Also, a personal bugbear of mine, literally none of these pattern pieces have balance marks on them. You've just got to figure this out on your own. So I made my gown using the width measurements for the size small and the length measurements for the size large, because I am a small circumference, large height human. This gown is extremely loose. Even so, for me, it was a little bit too loose. Now, what I do think is interesting is that for me, the size small fitted beautifully across the back. The front, however, was massively too large, which is interesting because the majority of other people that I've seen make this garment, which isn't a lot of people, like the audience for potato sack medieval dresses is surprisingly small. We should fix that. The few other people that I have seen make this garment have all taken it in at the back, not the front. All of those people have been women with curvier figures. I have a very flat chest. This is obviously not archaeology, but it would support the argument that this is maybe a dress intended historically for women. It's not going to stop me wearing it. So the main thing I wanted to change is I wanted to take in the front. I also found that even in the large length size, the sleeves were too short. This is a very common problem for me. I have long arms. I am used to having to extend all of the sleeves ever. And those were the only real major changes that I wanted to make to this pattern before getting into making a second mock-up. The goal is obviously to eventually make this out of wool, not because I intend to do any like Norse medieval reenactment anytime soon. I just think that would be super nice. But for now we will try just polycotton and we'll see if the pattern works. I don't have great records of the first time I did this. I think I filmed some of it, so we're gonna dive in, but there's not gonna be any like narration or anything, so your guess is as good as mine as to how I made this, and there's no help in the book, so we're gonna make this up as we go along. Let's get into it. It turns out I did have some footage of the first dress I made, which was in May of 2021, so there will be some discrepancies. I like this a lot, it's very comfortable, but there are a few things that I'd like to change. The sleeves are too short and the front is very loose on me. I also didn't manage to get front or back gauze into this gown, which I'd like to fix this time around. Back in 2021, I used this check cotton I got in someone else's de-stash. The pile wasn't quite as bad back then. I decided to scale up this pattern and not add seam allowance, which means I have to do it manually when I want to cut it out. I can't say I recommend this. To me, that time is better spent getting more accurate with your sewing, but I also haven't gotten around to redrafting the pattern, so here we are. It's good to see that I was having to be creative with the cutting layout back then too, although I had forgotten that this was pre-me getting a cutting table. I used to do all this on the floor, you guys. I also didn't have quite enough fabric, and because I apparently had too much time on my hands, it was 2021, I hand-pieced the gaps. The side back panel is this weird forky thing, which in theory creates the illusion of being 2 panels, even though it's only 1 from about the waist down. Now on the previous dress, I actually did what you're supposed to do. I extended the dart at the top the whole way down into a tiny pin tuck fake seam. This actually looks really good and is very unobtrusive. I didn't have a serger back then, so I finished the seams by pinking them, and it's held up really well to repeated washing. Another point in favour of sergers being not as essential as YouTube would have you believe. Because, again, I had too much time on my hands, I also finished the sleeves and neckline with a very fine bias facing. I sewed this down by hand.
And it was a lovely change to return to the 20th century, having just completed that mammoth 1820 project. But as often happens, things didn't exactly go to plan, and in fact this outfit took on a whole new lease of life. What started as an everyday retro outfit has become a whole palaver. I'm already very fed up with it, but we're going to persevere and get this done.
Fast forward to 2025 and it's time to pull out this pattern again and see what we can do. Taking a chunk out of the front was very easy, as it's a straight line. I actually took a bit less out than I originally planned, since I thought taking 3 or 4 inches total out of the front in one go might be a bit excessive. I am definitely considering a second trim though. As for the sleeves, I wanted to extend them by about 2 inches, but this piece has a lot of shape to it, so I split the pattern at 4 different points and added in a ½ inch at each one. With extensions this small, I usually don't tape extra paper in. You can just use the tape itself, as it's wide enough to cover the gap. I use a quilting ruler under the pattern piece to make sure the section is even and the right size. The fabric I'm using for this is 4 meters of a Halloween polycotton I've had in the stash for a few years. I think this would probably have been enough fabric normally, but unfortunately, it's directional and I didn't want to have the print upside down on some panels. I had to get a little creative. The pieces consist of 2 sleeves and 2 sleeve gauze, 1 front and 1 back panel, slit up the centre front and back for the gauze. Note that the back panel is completely straight with no indication of the armhole. That is easily the most aggravating thing about this pattern. 2 side back panels with the little forky top to make it look like 2 panels on each side. 4 side front panels, 2 of each kind. And the centre front and centre back gauze, which I was so pleased that I managed to squeeze out of the fabric, not realising that I had cut 2 when in fact I should have been cutting 4. I'm sure this won't cause any problems. Yes, that is foreshadowing. The first thing I did was sew the dart on the side back panels, and this time I did just sew it as a dart and not continue the seam the whole way down. It's very poofy and odd, and I think I prefer the other way. Then I overlocked the edge of all the pieces, which took a long time and had mixed success. For the sleeves, I had to piece together the remaining bits of fabric, but that worked out pretty well. I started out by sewing one side of the gore onto the sleeve. Then I could sew the other side of the gore to the other side of the sleeve. And finally sew up the sleeve seam itself. I do this 3-stage process so I'm not catching any of the seam allowances. I also finished the cuffs at this point because it's easier than when they're attached to the whole dress. I inserted the half-size front and back gauze, which definitely caused some issues. I sewed the first side front panels to the front, followed by the second side front panels. Then I opted to keep going and sewed on the side back panels. I had a somewhat audacious plan for how I was going to deal with the whole back panel has no discernible features thing that didn't involve a lot of measuring and marking. I attached the back panel at the shoulders and also took this opportunity to finish the neckline. I then attempted to execute my brilliant plan, which was to set in the sleeves before closing up the side back seams. This wasn't great. I mean, the sleeves are in, but I think they're twisted, and this was not the quick, foolproof workaround I was hoping for. After finally closing up the side backs, I levelled and finished the hem, and now we have our final finished garment of this video. That was a lot. So what do we think? On the one hand, I have a lot of affection for the Herjolfsnes original gown. I love that it's a real historical garment. I love that it is very, very full. I love that it is not actually shapeless. The shaping is very subtle and very weird, but it is still shaped. I love the quirky little uneven sleeve cuffs. That's something that I chose to keep. I am conscious of the fact that I have not managed to make it technically correctly one time so far. We'll figure that out. This time around, I'm glad that I got some front and back gores in, even if it wasn't correct front and back gore. I need to write that on that pattern piece so I don't forget next time. I also don't think I set in the sleeves properly. My cunning plan to set the back panel in after the sleeves, that didn't go great, but like, it doesn't matter. It's a cozy at home clothing piece. It's for lounging on the sofa and no one cares. I really enjoy how such a voluminous dress can be very breezy, or if you like, wrap it around yourself as you cuddle up in your chair, quite cozy. Compare and contrast to the summit dress, obviously I haven't tried the View A historical style sleeves. They look fine, it's just the lantern sleeves are so much more interesting. I don't know that I'll get a lot of use out of the medieval style ones. It's great to have the option. I like that there are length options, and I like that it is considerably simpler and comes with a full set of instructions that you can follow. It is, I think, a little bit more of an A-line shape than the original gown's sort of like slightly weird, almost flower-like. The original gown has a very weird, organic, belled flare. The summit dress is much cleaner. I feel like the flare starts from higher up. It is in general just like more modern and more simplified. That's not a criticism. And sometimes I'm in the mood for that and sometimes I'm not, which I guess is a long-winded way of saying I think there's room for both of these in my life. They fulfill slightly different niches. Definitely if you don't consider yourself an advanced sewist and you're not happy winging it the whole way through, you want help with sizing, you want instructions, you want someone to hold your hand through the whole process, absolutely get the summit dress. The instructions were great, the sizing was pretty good. Generally just really happy with the whole experience of doing it. It was very simple, very easy to follow. The instructions were very clear and very detailed and had a lot of like very good information in them. Tackling the gown or any of the pieces from Medieval Garments Reconstructed is a project. You are going to have to figure things out as you go along. You are going to make something and then be like, I should have done that differently. I guess I'm gonna have to make another one. And there's a very special kind of joy in that. It's not always what you want. Sometimes you just want a quick meal. You don't want to perfect a complicated recipe. When it's not even really a recipe, it's just like some suggestions. I would really love to make the summit gown in a more robust fabric than this sort of mock-up muslin that I used. I would really love to make the Herjolfsnes gown in wool. However, as I have mentioned in some previous videos, I have a real problem with the amount of fabric that is currently in my house. I think I'm gonna have to like hold the wool over me as like a reward. Maybe if I clear out, I don't know, is 100 meters too much? 100 meters doesn't feel like. I mean, 100 meters would only begin to scratch the surface of what's in this room, so maybe that's a good metric. Anyway, I'll figure out some kind of goal to work towards, and when I hit it, I will get myself some really nice wool. In absolute love with the Fabworks made in Huddersfield's collection. Just these really like vibrant, jewel-toned wools, produced in Yorkshire, which we love. I can already imagine it now. It's going to be super vibrant and cozy and just perfect for this winter. Perfect. So that's the goal. Have that by this winter, which means I need to get a move on with this fabric. Anyway, this video has gone on too long. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you to Moonbin once again for sponsoring the video. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe to keep the YouTube gods happy. Follow me on Tumblr and Instagram and TikTok and all the other things if you would like to stay up to date with what I'm doing in various different unhinged ways. Down in the description box you'll find a link to my Ko-fi page where you can make a one-off or recurring donation to support this channel, and you'll also be able to become a member of the channel here on YouTube. Members get early access to all of my videos and some extra fun stuff. Additionally, I write a monthly blog in both places which tells you all about what books I've been reading and occasionally what TV shows I've been watching, but I don't watch a lot of TV, so it's mainly books. No matter how you choose to support the channel, I couldn't do what I do without your help. And I think that's about it from me. So dream big, and I'll see you next time.